January 1944. Central Germany. The winter sun is thin and hard, the contrails pulled straight like white wire. A city of B-17 seconds pushes east at 25,000 feet, turret domes, glittering oxygen hisses loud in the mask. At 11 o'clock, high dark specks tilt into the sun and come down casual like men who have done this 100 times. Messerschmitts roll on their backs. It will be the same script: break the lead box, pull vertical, vanish clean. Then a different shape steps out of the glare above them. Long wings, tall tail, the shark nose that seems to lean into the future. Mustangs already higher, not wasting the dive, sliding to live on German sixes before the Germans finish the roll. A 109 checks behind expecting blue and gets a black spinner locked to his canopy. The American hand is quiet on the throttle. The sight stops moving. The first burst is short and cold. 8. 50 seconds walk from the wing root through the engine. A metal petal opens. Glycol smokes milk grey. He pulls, but pull is time, and time is gone. The Mustang stays welded to the tail, breathing easy. A second burst spiders the canopy. Breath turns ragged. Hot oil stings the eyes. The fighter kinks once, and comes apart in bright shards that tumble and never stop turning. Across the box, a Fokker-Wulf tries the old Cure high-side slash across the lead. 2 P-51 seconds arrive on a shallow line with speed to spare after the pass. 3 bright points of tracer count off in the gun sight. A panel lifts from the German's wing and sails like a dead leaf. A parachute blooms white and swings. No one cheers. The bombers hold formation. The escorts climb back to the perch and wait for the next specs that always come. Engines drone. Masks hiss. The sky goes still. By the first weeks of 1944, the air war over Germany is a rope pulled tight at both ends. Karl Spaatz has the job of breaking the Reich's war-making backbone in daylight. Ira Eker has bled to prove it can be done. James Doolittle arrives and changes a single habit that touches everything. Fighters are no longer bodyguards that die beside bombers. They are hunters that range ahead, above, and behind. The order sounds simple on a blackboard. In the air, it means the P-51 does not wait to be asked. It owns the perch before the bomb run tears at the interceptors during the run and is still there when the city of aluminum turns for home. The need is not abstract. Schweinfurt and Regensburg etched it into skin the previous autumn. Crews at Thorpe Abbotts and Bassingbourn can point to empty bunks and say the names. Losses at the far edge of escort lines made range feel like a moral failure, not a measurement. Packard built Merlin's paper tanks slung under wings and forward fighter fields changed that geometry. Now the Americans can draw a single white line from East Anglia to central Germany and back and say we will be present along the whole of it. Germany still believes in the remedy it knows. Adolf Galland studies the plots and tells groups of tired men that discipline and angle will still make the bomber stream bleed. The Bf 109 will climb like a thrown spear if the pilot keeps it clean. The TW 190 will roll out of a gun sight like a bar of soap if the man at the stick is not late. Veteran Staffeln still exist, and some of the old hands can make a cannon pass look like handwriting. Fuel is short, and replacement pilots are green, but the promise remains: if the aces get a clean run, unescorted boxes die in daylight. American confidence is not theatrical. Crews in the 8th Air Force are exhausted and older than their faces. The Mustang is new to many of them, and new things on cold mornings can be a worry. The men who strap into P-51 seconds at Debden, Leiston, Steeple, Morden and Bodney have learned not to speak about victory, only about altitudes and times, and the way contrails shear in certain winds. They carry numbers in their heads: fuel minutes to the initial point, minutes on station, minutes of reserve, and those numbers add up to something the winter of 43 did not allow freedom to choose, when to fight and when not to. The stakes run beyond the altimeter. If the Luftwaffe can still carve up bomber groups beyond the old escort limits, the ground war slows. Karl Spaatz wants German fuel, aluminum and bearings, hammered until panzer divisions become ideas on maps. Dwight Eisenhower needs rail yards and bridges turned into twisted lines well before men step onto beaches that have not yet been named in public. Every fortress lost is not just 10 lives and a machine. It is days and weeks shaved off schedules the Allies want to keep and the Germans want to ruin. If the escorts fail, the arithmetic forces pauses. Pauses cost blood somewhere else. Why does Berlin still think it can frighten the sky? Because fear is momentum, and for years the vertical slash from the sun has worked. Because a single staffel in the right place can turn a neat formation into a wounded animal. Because Göring still expects his Jagdwaffe to buy time with skill, when factories cannot buy it with engines. Why are the Americans not calm even now? Because they know the Luftwaffe is most dangerous when cornered, and because the winter air is a gift to engines on both sides. Because men remember October, and do not trust promises until they are paid in full. Doolittle's change of habit threads through everything. Fighters do not tie themselves to bombers with short leashes, they climb and go hunting. When they return to the box, they return from above with energy in the bank and time to spend. The P-51 makes that possible because its legs are long enough to be reckless and still be responsible. It carries drop tanks to the rendezvous, throws them away when speed is life, and arrives at the fight with enough breath left for the second and third decisions. Range becomes presence, presence becomes pressure. Pressure turns skill into mistakes on the other side. The moment you saw in Winter Light a German ace rolling into a practiced attack and finding a Mustang quietly living on his tail matters because it is not theatre, it is a hinge. If scenes like that repeat across Kassel, Oschersleben and Gotha, the promise that aces can still dictate the day dissolves. If they do not repeat, the bomber stream keeps paying a tax it cannot afford. The rope hums between those outcomes. One side brings factories and a new way of using fighters. The other brings memory and the last hours of the best pilots it has left. Somewhere in that thin blue air above a frozen river, the decision begins to lean. Range, speed, and gun effect only matter where men live long enough to use them. The Mustang's gift is not a table of numbers. It is what those numbers feel like when metal starts shaking and time shortens to half seconds. Start with the run-in. A Bf 109G coming downhill is a knife. Its cannon, MG 151/20, puts explosive shells into a bomber's skin that sound like someone kicking a steel door. In the seasons before the Mustang took the perch, that downhill slash worked because it needed only a seam, a gap in the box, a gunner's blind arc, a moment when an escort had already spent its altitude to cover the first pass and could not be there for the second. The Luftwaffe built muscle memory around that seam. Adolf Galland and the Gruppekommandeur taught it, refined it, lived by it. What changes when the P-51 holds the high air is not romance but geometry. A Packard-built Merlin-breathing winter oxygen lets a pilot pay out speed in inches instead of burning it all at once. That retained energy is the difference between a single angry pounce and two calm corrections that keep a German inside the ring of the sight without over-controlling. The radiator scoop that looks like a vulnerability in photographs acts like a tuned lung. The airplane arrives, fast moves, once trims, and stays fast enough to move again. Translate the headline words into cockpit truths. Range with a pair of 108-gallon paper tanks, the Mustang takes the perch before the intercept, rides it through the bomb run, and is still there when the box turns for home. In the mask, this feels like your wingman still being on frequency after the third bounce, not a number in a spec sheet. Speed top end is theatre. What saves you is what remains after a turn. The P-51 finishes a medium G maneuver with enough in the bank that the next decision is not a coin toss. Firepower 6 AN M2. 50 seconds do not cut aluminum. They pulverize it, and at 200 yards a half-second burst removes pieces. No pilot can fly without coolant magnetos, aileron hinges. German strengths do not evaporate. The Bf 109 still climbs like a spear if the man at the stick keeps it clean and light. The Faux 190A still rolls out of trouble like a bar of soap if the American is late by a heartbeat. The Luftwaffe sight pictures, learned in hard schools by men who survived 1,940, still work when the approach is perfect and the sky above is free. But fuel poverty is a weight you cannot roll out of. Shortened training syllabi turn checklists into substitutes for instinct. New pilots arrive with engines equal to last year's but hands that are not. Against escorts that can stay small, errors compound instead of washing away in a dive. Zones decide who lives. At low altitude and low speed, the 190's roll rate can make a Mustang overshoot if the American got greedy. In a pure vertical zoom, the 109 can make air into a ladder faster than a P-51, burdened with drop tanks if the German has the room and the discipline not to yank early. But at high altitude, with energy in the bank, the Mustang owns the long, shallow pursuit, where a trimmed shot looks boring and ends fights. You do not see that in a catalogue. You taste it when the sight suddenly stops moving, and the target does not. Kinematics become human at the point of fire. A calm Mustang pilot who learned from men like Hubert Zemke and Don Blakesley will not chase a perfect snapshot if it costs altitude. He will take the almost perfect half-second and then climb right back to where decisions are his. The German opposite him, say, a Staffelkapitän, who grew up in the Channel front, expects the American to spend everything on the first pass and be gone. When the American is still there after the second correction, the script tears. Consider a morning over Oschersleben. The bombers draw the defenders up as planned. A Rotti of Feveliu 190 seconds commits to a high-side slice across the lead element. A Mustang section, already sitting 2,000 feet higher, slides off the sunline and refuses the drag down. The lead P-51 takes a measured quartering burst at 200 yards, not a hose, a count of tracers 1, 2, 3, through the starboard wing route of the first Fokker-Wulf. A panel lifts, then the airplane yaws, then the pilot bails. The wingman, who expected the Americans to dive away after spending their speed, sees them instead regain the perch. He breaks early not because he is a coward, but because the old cure suddenly opens him to a worse disease, being low, slow, and alone, with someone above him who is not in a hurry. Or take a return leg past Kassel. Habit once made the Luftwaffe dangerous here, catch the bombers tired, catch the escorts short on fuel once more, and run home with victory and enough gasoline to land. The Mustang changes the arithmetic. Drop tanks went away at the merge. Internal fuel and clean wings put the escorts back at altitude in minutes. A swarm of BF 109Gs tests the edge of the formation and finds the edge has moved. The Americans engage brake reform above the box and engage again, still with the muzzle energy, to saw coolant lines in a half-second cut. The Germans disengage not because they are beaten in a duel, but because the duel does not present itself. It is denied by position and by time. Even where the Mustang is not better, it is there and there wins. The 190 can still roll out from under a late shot. The 109 can still streak vertical, if the leash is long. But the escorts now write the leash length. Aces like Walter Oesau and Egon Meyer proved that perfect attacks still kill, and some days they did. Yet the system around them is losing the conditions those attacks require. Surprise from above free egress escorts that vanish after 1 hot minute. When those conditions thin out, individual brilliance becomes a risk instead of a plan. What does this feel like inside aluminum? In the bomber waist, it sounds like fewer frantic traverses to chase streaks crossing the top and more steady arcs tracking fighters that never quite get a clean line. In a German cockpit, it feels like heavier stick forces because the pull lasts longer than it used to, and like breath going fast in the mask, while the American's voice on the radio sounds as if he is counting torque values. In a Mustang, it feels like restraint, a trimmed sight, a half-second to climb back to where the next decision is easier than the last. Repeat the pattern, and it ceases to be a story. Cologne, Oschersleben, Gotha, Kassel, perch patience. Retained speed, short, cold bursts, re-perch. The same ingredients cook the same result often enough that crews stop telling it as a miracle and start filing it as procedure. This is not luck. This is repeatable. January 1944 early light over the Haas. Heinz Noak feels the cold through the gloves anyway, a clean ache in the fingers, as he eases the 109G through thin cloud. The canopy seals with a rubber sigh. At 15,000 feet, the air turns white at the edges and the contrails of strangers slice the morning into lanes. He checks the sunline, checks his rot, thinks about fuel without wanting to. The needle never moves as slowly as you need it to. The call comes from the ground net, in clipped code he has heard since he was too young to drink stream at altitude course east-west heavy. He licks dry teeth and settles the prop pitch where habit keeps it. He has done this so many times that the first minute of fear feels like a friend who tells the truth. There they are, silver rectangles in tears, sunlight hammering them into a chain of mirrors. He sees the high cover too, but he expects it to be where it was last year, arriving late, diving once, leaving. He rolls right, shows the belly to the sun levels with a tiny forward pressure that makes the sight jump and then settle. The ritual is still good. Adolf Galland's chalkboards lived in rooms that smelled like coal and rain. They were right about geometry even when they were wrong about fuel. You take the high side slice across the lead, you pull vertical, you roll, you come back with speed and surprise, still in the pockets. He commits. The engine note smooths into a bright, hard thread. The bomber box swells. The top of the formation spreads into rivets and gun barrels and men in glass bubbles who have not seen him yet. He rides the line across the lead element and waits for the shape that means he can write 6 funerals with 2 seconds of cannon. The first tracers from the fortresses are wild. They always are. He adjusts 4 millimeters of stick, breathes once into the mask, feels the old calm. The sky behind his canopy should be empty. It is not. A shadow lives there that should not exist at this altitude at this minute with this much speed already promised elsewhere. Long wings, tall tail. The shark nose that always looks closer than it is. The Mustang belongs in photographs he has seen pinned by Americans to briefing room cork. It does not belong behind his neck during the correct attack. He tells himself it is a trick of the sun, and then a stitching comes up the fuselage that is not a trick, a line of bright points counted in his peripheral vision, 1, 2, 3. The forward skin tent splits, the smell becomes hot water and paint, then engine oil, raw and metallic. He pulls, because that is what you do when order collapses, and the pull is heavy too, heavy. His hand on the stick feels like someone else's hand. The canopy crazes along a line like a frozen river. Breath goes ragged. A voice in his headset says, "Brake now," and he tries, but the right is full of light and tracer. He gets out of it by accident. The American eases, not from mercy but from arithmetic, climbing back to where the next decision is his. Noak levels the engine, coughing like a smoker, and does not re-attack. He radios nothing. He does not have the language for this yet, that does not sound like fear. He points the nose home, counting minutes and clouds, and wonders how long a myth can keep flying on fuel it does not have. Across the same contrail lanes, an hour later and 1,000 meters higher, George Preddy rides a line of sun that keeps his canopy bright and the world below readable. The 352nd launched into air that hurts the teeth. He carries drop tanks that make the climb lazy and the first turn slow, but the plan is not to turn. The plan is to be there, still there, and then there again. He trims with a little thumb pressure and leaves the throttle where it sings without complaint. His wingman checks the high 6 every 10 seconds like a metronome. They speak in clicks and single syllables, because language is a finite resource, and they need most of it for flying. He sees them fighters rolling off the sun, disciplined and beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with politics. The urge is to dive now, loud and fast, to knock one down in a clean, heroic arc. Don Blakesley had burned that instinct out of him on wet English mornings. Own the perch, spend only what you must, make the second correction count more than the first. He slides, not dives, and the slide keeps speed in the bank where fear cannot touch it. A 109 angles to cross the top of the lead box. Preddy holds him in a ring of glass, lets the sight settle from a slow figure 8 to a circle that is suddenly still, and squeezes a half-second that feels like cheating. The German's airplane opens a small door in its nose and throws smoke like a grey handkerchief. Preddy does not follow him down. He breathes once shallow in the mask and climbs 200 feet back into a place where gravity answers to him first. Far off the beam, a Focke-Wulf tries to cure history with vigour. Preddy's wingman calls it 2 o'clock, slightly high, and is already moving. The German rolls with the confident twitch of a man who has survived years on luck and skill. The American matches the roll without burning the account. The FW-190 flashes through the sight for a quarter second, leaves a bright scratch, and then is not where it was supposed to be. Preddy's wingman refuses to stab at the shadow. He lets the airplane do the boring thing, trim nose up a hair count to 1, 2, 3, and the German reappears not as a foe, but as a solution. The burst is short. A panel lifts from the 190's starboard root and tumbles like a dead leaf. The pilot punches out. The parachute opens hard. On the radio, the wingman says only clear. They do not chase the next targets past the edge of altitude that keeps them safe. They live above the box like watchmen who do not descend the stairs unless the bell is real. When they go down together in a line shallow enough that the climb back is not a gamble. When they come back up, they do not talk about it. Preddy glances left at the drop tank stub now empty, feels the airplane cleaner on the wing, and consults the fuel numbers in his head that feel more like weather than math. He has minutes to spend, and a quiet confidence that he will spend them on his terms. In a different hour, on a different day, Heinz Knock leads a swarm that includes a boy whose cheeks still hold the last of adolescence. The briefing told them the same lines it always tells: discipline, angle, speed. The boy nods too often. In the climb, his breathing goes fast and loud in the mask. Knock wants to reach across the distance and slow it down with a hand on the shoulder that is not there. They roll into a sun they have learned to worship because it hides things. This time the sun hides Americans who do not hurry. The boy makes his run too deep. It is a good run by last year's rules, and it ends in a blossom of sparks that walk across his wing. Knock sees the canopy shimmer and then turn white like frost. He calls brake in a voice that is not command but plea. The boy does not brake. The airplane breaks. The chute pops late and small. It hangs. It swings. Preddy hears the bomber gunners cuss in languages that sound like Ohio and Brooklyn. He keeps his eyes where the next specks will grow, not where the last ones died. When he speaks, it is talk values, headings, altitudes. A minute later, he drops into a short, mean fight that lasts exactly as long as a fuel calculation allows. He takes a half second and then leaves the temptation of heroics on the table. He climbs. The radio is quiet except for breathing, and even that is careful. After landing, the Mustang smells like hot metal and oil, and something sweet from the high octane that always leaks a little. Crew chiefs are already there with tools that fit like prayers. Preddy walks the wing and fingers a row of holes near the root, shallow bites that depot men will erase in the dark. In the debrief, he does not say kill. He says engaged, fired observed, strikes regained perch. On another field, Knock writes nothing at all. He stares at a nick on his forearm from the canopy frame and cannot stop thinking about the moment the ritual went quiet and the sky handed him back his life as if by clerical error. Inside both cockpits, the same truths throbbed different. For Knock, the old script had become a trap sprung by gravity and a patient enemy. For Preddy, procedure had become a kind of mercy, the only kind war ever offers, measured in altitude and seconds, and the steadiness of a reticle that stops moving when you do everything right. Neither man feels brave. One feels old. The other feels tired. Above them, the contrails hold straight in the winter air like white wires nailed into the blue, and the bombers go on. The hinge begins at a desk. James Doolittle takes the 8th Air Force in January 1944 and removes one idea that had seemed polite. But fatal fighters are not to die beside bombers. Fighters are to kill. The order is plain. They will range ahead, above and behind the stream. They will pounce first, re-perch and pounce again. Carl Spaatz backs it, because the target set he needs broken fuel bearings. Airframes cannot be reached if boxes are carved up at the edge of the old escort lines. Ira Eaker had fought to prove daylight attack was possible and paid dearly to lay the runway for this change. Now, doctrine moves from defense to pressure. Paper becomes practice fast because logistics is ready. North Americans' lines at Inglewood and Dallas push P-51 Bs and Cs with Packard-built Merlins across the Atlantic in a tide. Burton Wood and the air depots in England learn the airplane's moods and cut turnaround from days to hours. Drop tanks, 75-gallon metal early 108-gallon paper soon after turn range from a promise into a habit. The tanks hang for the climb, and the transit are punched away at the merge, and the airframe suddenly feels clean, willing to bank without slop, eager to hold energy through the second correction. Maintenance writes this into the day armourers time the guns to identical rates. Crew chiefs safety wire in patterns that an inspector can read at a glance. Merlin fitters keep boost where pilots expect it to live. Doctrine without spares is fantasy. Here, the spares arrive in wooden crates like grain. Commanders teach the attitude that makes the math real. William Kepner pushes 8 Fighter Command to fly like hunters. Hubert Zemke's 56th and Don Blakesley's 4th turn, terse notes into muscle memory own the perch. Do not trade altitude for adrenaline. If you fire, make it a counted half-second that removes something essential if you hit climb. When the radio says free lance, it does not mean chaos. It means a disciplined distribution of eyes and energy above the bomber city. The P-47 groups, still vital, use their height and dive to break attacks. The P-51 groups extend coverage where the old leashes snapped. Relay cover appears. One group rides the stream and another takes the bomb, run a third, picks up the egress. Presence becomes continuous, and continuous presence crushes timing. Intelligence and film make the loop short. Gun camera reels spool at Debden Leiston Bodney. Officers like John Meyer and James Howard sit crews down and walk frame by frame through the moments when sight pictures go from hopeful to certain. Over-controlling shows up as a wobble. Greed shows up as a burned-off knot of altitude that costs a life 2 minutes later. Debriefs go cold and specific. Where did you break? What did you spend? Where did you reform? Intercepts with the Y-service and radar plots add geometry. The next morning, the routes bend a little to make the enemy climb where the escorts are already waiting. On paper, the orders look grey. Escort to target and return with aggressive action authorized becomes a sentence men can repeat in their sleep. In the air, it means a 350-second pilot can leave the box to kill a forming bounce and know no one will ask why he is not glued to a wingtip. It means a 20th group section can sit 2,000 feet higher than habit and refuse the drag down. It means that when Donald Blakesley says go get them, he is not talking about a glorious dive that leaves you low and alone. He is talking about a shallow slide that buys the second shot and the climb back again and again all the way to the IP and out. Industry underwrites the risk. A P-51 bent on Tuesday is a job card at Burtonwood on Wednesday and a green light on Friday. Guns that run rough get new cams. Barrels that pattern wide get changed before a pilot ever hears the word dispersion. Packard's Merlins land by the hundreds. Bad units get pulled and stripped without drama. Pilots rotate with hours still left in their hands because the pipeline in the States still teaches in full sorties, not half. The system can afford to be strict because it can afford to replace. On the other side, Adolf Galland can still brief elegant solutions on chalkboards, and aces like Walter Oeso and Heinz Baer can still make a vertical stroke look like handwriting, but fuel has turned from asset to ration and veterans to irreplaceable artifacts. You do not risk a museum, you preserve it and hope the room stays dry. Standard operating procedures harden in days, not quarters. Do not circle fight. Dive, extend and climb back to the watchpost. Do not chase decoys east. Save your breath for the men forming above the box. Clear the top first. If you must go low, do it in pairs, and for seconds, not minutes. Bomber groups write their own matching lines. Do not break formation for a single fighter. Trust the cover above. Keep the geometry. The tone is not heroic. It is mechanical. That is the point. Even the fuel plan becomes doctrine. Tank discipline turns from suggestion to law. Burn externals to a mark jettison before the merge check manifold. Pressure after the first pass report, fuel states in minutes, not gallons. Controllers hear numbers that let them hand off cover like batons. 40 minutes on station, 20 to egress, 10 to home base reserve. When a controller moves the 355th to the top of a stream near Gotha, he is not guessing. He is spending minutes like currency the system printed overnight. The change touches targets. Spatz's oil plan needs bombers over Magdeburg, Merseburg, Bohlen and Leipzig, often enough that repairs never catch up. Without escorts with legs, those routes are suicide notes. With escorts that begin to act like a weather system everywhere, constant, slightly heavier than yesterday, the Luftwaffe's window narrows. Attacks compress into shorter, more desperate slashes. When they work against the edges. The middle begins to feel protected, not by armor, but by timing. German paperwork shows the bruise before pride admits it. Group reports add lines like enemy escorts, maintained altitude throughout engagement, and loss of surprise due to top cover presence. The remedy suggested is always geometry. The Luftwaffe once owned climb higher, mass better, strike cleaner. The constraint is always the same: fuel, hours, men. Kesselring and Galland can write exhortations. They cannot conjure octane or seasons of training. The Americans can. None of this sounds grand in a briefing hut. It sounds like lists, but lists move weight. A depot that can return a bent airplane by the next sortie is a tactical idea. A film loop that teaches a 21-year-old to hold his fire until the reticle is still is a weapon. A commander who says free the fighters and means trust your altitude is a lever that lifts the whole day. Piece by piece the system aligns. Doolittle's permission, Kepner's organization, Zemke's and Blakesley's ruthlessness, Packard's engines, North American's jigs, Burton Wood's wrenches, controllers who speak in minutes, pilots who spend them without drama. From that point, the sky changes character. The escorts stop arriving for scenes. They occupy the stage. The Luftwaffe can still score, and some days the ledger bleeds, but the conditions that made German certainty possible begin to disappear on a schedule. Procedures replace miracles. The men inside oxygen masks feel it first as quiet, fewer frantic dives, more measured slides, fewer chases to the horizon, more climbs back to the watch. When doctrine, logistics and production point the same direction, the fight stops being a series of emergencies and starts being a process. And process repeated wears through myth, the way contrails wear grooves into winter blue. By late winter, the realization does not arrive as a headline. It arrives as a pause in a ready room when someone asks who is leading top cover tomorrow, and no one answers with a joke. It arrives as a quiet change in hand motions on chalkboards at Dielen and Wernicken, where arrows that once stabbed cleanly through bomber boxes now curl, hesitate, and end with question marks rubbed half away by sleeves. Adolf Galland still speaks of geometry and timing, and he is not wrong. He is simply stranded on a shrinking island of conditions that no longer appear on time. On a clear day over Oschersleben, Walter Oso climbs with a small group the kind of climb that once felt like destiny. He is one of the last men who can make a vertical stroke look like handwriting. The plan is the plan they have perfected since the Channel front hit the lead element at the right angle and make the Americans pay for arranging their courage in neat rows. The approach is elegant, disciplined, and correct. And then the sky refuses to be where it is supposed to be. A layer of P-51 seconds sits 1,000 meters higher than habit. They do not pounce, they slide. When Oso completes his role, he finds not empty blue but a reticle that has been waiting. He still carves his line, still draws blood with cannon, but the exhale of relief never comes. The climb away, once a ladder to safety, is now a staircase that ends in a locked door. He breaks off, not beaten, he is Walter Oso, and he will not permit the word but converted from hunter to survivor by the presence of machines that still have breath after the second correction. In a Debden hut the same afternoon, Don Blakesley takes a grease pencil and puts it through the myth with no poetry at all. Do not chase the decoy east. Own the top. Hit once. Climb. The men do not cheer because the proof is not in words. It is in the memory of the morning when a section returned to the perch 3 times on one tank plan and found that the Luftwaffe had run out of the single thing it had always counted on time to arrange the fight on its terms. Heinz Noak feels it in his hands before his mind admits it. He rolls into the correct attack and senses the stick grow heavier in a way that tells him the pull will last longer than it used to and that the breath in his mask will go fast, while the American's voice on the radio stays level. He dives without conviction and climbs without faith. The climb is where the truth lives. The air that once felt like an ally now feels like a bill collector. He levels and does not say why he is leveling. On paper, the report will speak of fuel and weather. In his neck, the muscles speak of a new rule. The second minute of this fight belongs to someone else. The paperwork catches up to the cockpit. Grouper reports begin to include lines that would have been unthinkable a season earlier. Enemy escorts maintained altitude throughout engagement. Surprise lost due to top cover presence. Climb to attack not possible without unacceptable fuel expenditure. These are not excuses. They are autopsies written in a tone so dry it scratches the eye. When Galland reads them, he does not doubt the skill of his men. He doubts the world's willingness to present them the old opportunities. There is no order he can issue that conjures octane experience or hours in the vertical. On the American side, the collapse of the myth is felt as an absence. George Preddy sits at altitude and waits for the streak that does not come. When the streak comes, it ends in a short, cold light in the gun sight and a climb back to where the next decision will be easier than the last. He does not feel triumphant. He feels on schedule. The transformation is not from fear to joy. It is from fear to procedure. What used to be crisis becomes timing. What used to be legend becomes a checklist item. The language of the debrief shifts from miracle to maintenance. Engaged, fired, observed strikes regained perch. Even the bomber crews sense the hinge without seeing the fights. Waist gunners talk less about the bright spears dropping from the sun and more about escorts that appear in the corners of their glass and refuse to go away. The soundscape changes, fewer frantic traverses, more measured arcs, fewer curses thrown at fast streaks, more short acknowledgements when a fighter passes through the field of view as a friend, not a threat. There are still days when the old Germany returns like a weather front and the ledger bleeds. Men like Egon Meyer prove that a perfect approach remains fatal, and on those days names are written on boards and bunks go empty. Myths do not die cleanly, they slough and peel. But the direction of travel is irreversible, because it is not anchored in a single duel. It is anchored in a schedule that Germany can no longer disrupt. The escorts are present at the beginning during the run and on the way out, and they are not tired when the bombers turn for home. The Luftwaffe still has saber edges. The Americans have a factory for making hours, and the hours are what decide who gets to choose. In that gap between edge and hours, behaviors change, attacks shorten, egresses begin earlier. Aces stop lecturing youngsters about glory and start whispering about geometry you do not dare attempt unless the sky is empty above you, which it no longer is. The bravest act quietly becomes refusing the wrong fight. That is not defeatism. It is adaptation. And adaptation under rationed fuel and dying experience becomes surrender by increments. The last piece is psychological, and it is small enough to miss if you are not listening for it. A Mustang section that once would have dived to avenge a bomber now climbs instead because the lesson is paid in full. The surest rescue is altitude, not anger. A German pilot who once would have yanked for the vertical now checks cloud distance first. Neither man has become less skilled. Both have been enlisted by a new set of rules written by range, speed, and 8 short, cold half-seconds that repeat until nothing surprising happens. That was the winter the sky stopped, being a place where aces could dictate, and started being a place where procedures could not be outrun. After that, the legend did not explode. It exhaled, thinned, and was gone. In the days that follow, film runs through projectors in huts that smell of damp wool and coffee gone cold. At Debden and Leiston, the gun camera frames look almost boring when played at normal speed. A reticle that drift stills a half-second of light, a panel lifting from a wing root, a thin smoke line, and then the climb back to altitude. John C. Meyer pauses the reel with a fingertip and taps the moment where greed would have driven the nose lower last season. He says nothing for a beat, and then one sentence that becomes habit, hold the perch. At Bodney, George Preddy leans against a wall, while younger pilots watch the same frames and memorize the silence that follows a clean burst. No speeches. A pencil notes fuel minutes, not heroics. On paper, the shift is drier. 8 Fighter Command's reports begin repeating the same clauses: escorts in position prior to intercept, aggressive action authorized, altitude superiority maintained throughout egress. Karl Spatz's oil plan, which had sounded like a punishment schedule for refineries on maps, turns into flight lines on real mornings. Merseburg, Berlin, Leipzig, flown often enough that repair crews in Germany can no longer catch up. James Doolittle's instruction to free the fighters, which some feared would scatter cover, does the opposite. By breaking the leash, he creates a net. Groups hand the stream off like batons according to fuel minutes. The controllers call out with the calm of trainmen. The Luftwaffe feels the change in the stomach first. Adolf Galland still draws elegant solutions on chalkboards, and veterans like Walter Osau still find ways to turn geometry into kills, but the window narrows. Group reports add lines no one wanted to write: surprise, compromised by top cover. Climb to attack not possible without unacceptable fuel expenditure. In debriefs, the word conserve appears beside fuel and alongside experience. Aces, who once lectured about audacity, begin to tell the boys to wait for an approach that does not expose the top of the canopy to a waiting sight. That approach appears less each week. Behavior shifts on both sides. Bomber crews at Thorpe Abbotts and Bassingbourn look up and see tall tales at the start, mid-run, and on the way out, and a particular kind of fear being abandoned at the worst minute eases into a routine they can live inside. Waist gunners talk more about measured arcs and less about spears from the sun. In fighter revetments, the language tightens: minutes to IP, minutes on station, minutes to reserve. Ground echelons at Burton Wood and the forward air depots make time tangible by returning bent airplanes in days. Guns harmonized to the same pattern, Merlins swapped without drama. Procedure becomes morale. Germany adjusts because it must. Jagdgeschwader that once owned the vertical now pick opportunistic edges, weather stragglers, egress turns, and leave earlier. The most skilled men remain dangerous. On some days, names still go on boards and bunks still go empty. Myths never die cleanly. But the center of the day fills with American presence that cannot be outrun. The old promise, give an ace the sun, and he will dictate, shrinks to specific hours over specific towns. And even there, a P-51 is often already waiting with speed in the bank and a quiet radio. The longer arc goes beyond one winter. The lesson range married to usable speed and gun effect, applied as procedure rather than theatre, hardens into air power common sense. Post-war manuals will write it as if it were inevitable. It was not. It was purchased in oxygen hiss and short-counted bursts, learned from men like Don Blakesley and Hubert Zemke, financed by factories that did not sleep and enforced by controllers who thought in minutes. When later generations plan fighters to go far, arrive fast, and fight repeatedly, without falling off their own timeline, they are obeying the frames that flickered in cold huts in 1944. Two questions stay open and keep arguments honest. If the same escort reality, drop tanks in numbers, doctrine already freed, controllers already fluent in minutes, had been present 6 months earlier, would the daylight offensive have walked to summer with a steadier gait, or would Germany have simply moved the pain into night and ground where it could still bite? And even in the winter of superiority was a beef 109, or few 190, the sharper knife in a fair duel at the right altitude, or did better cease to matter once duels could no longer be chosen on German terms? Preddy writes no answers. He flies the next schedule. Galland writes no excuses. He asks for fuel and time the country can no longer provide. Sparts continues to aim heavy metal at refineries until maps darken. Doolittle keeps telling young men to hunt with discipline rather than die with loyalty. The contrails over central Germany hold straight in the cold, as if nailed to the blue, and the bomber city moves regardless, escorted not by miracles, but by a process that now repeats without drama. From here the story bends lower. Factories, columns, rail yards, bridges, targets that punish an army's movement rather than its pride will meet a different American temperament, a squat airframe with a radial the size of a room and armor like a habit. The men on the ground called it a flying bulldozer. Next, we watch the P-47 Thunderbolt teach roads and rail lines to fear daylight and see how procedures learned high above bomber boxes turned into terror at treetop height.